At 82, James Taylor is finally speaking about the people he kept silent about for most of his life. For decades, he chose calm over conflict, letting his reputation for gentleness hide the strain he carried behind closed doors. What the public saw was harmony. What he lived was something far more complicated. Today, he is ready to reveal the colleagues, partners, and critics whose behavior left the deepest marks on him. 5 names, 5 reckonings, shaped by years of distance and reflection. And the final one challenges everything fans thought they knew about his past. Number 5, Carly Simon, the partner he could not reach. Carly Simon was born in 1945 in New York City. By the early 70s, she was a rising songwriter with a distinct voice, and together she and James Taylor became one of the most celebrated couples in music. To the public, they looked like a perfect match. 2 acclaimed artists, 2 strong careers, 1 shared home. Their duet suggested balance and affection, a partnership built on respect. Behind that image, the truth was harder. Taylor's heroin addiction created distance that Simon later described as a wall she could not break through. She said that after their divorce in 1983, communication ceased, and years later she called their relationship non-existent. The contrast between what fans imagined and what they lived became stark. The breaking point came in a private moment she later recounted. One night she said she saw Taylor inject heroin. His reply stayed with her, "I can't have you and the habit at the same time." The line was meant to be honest, but it marked the moment trust slipped beyond repair. Taylor later acknowledged the same reality in quieter terms. If one of the people is addicted, it's not going to work. The whole person is simply not available. Touring widened the distance. His album Dad Loves His Work told its own story about where his energy was going. Simon described feeling left out and shut out, a partner watching the center of their life drift elsewhere. Reports of infidelity added weight, including claims that Taylor had begun a relationship with a dancer while still living under the same roof. The consequences were lasting. They separated in 1981 and finalized their divorce in 1983. Afterwards, Simon said Taylor put down an iron curtain, and that even the children sometimes felt the effects through unanswered calls and limited access. Taylor kept his comments measured, saying only that divorce means people go your own ways. Their story reveals how fame and distance can erode even the strongest partnership, and if this felt deeply personal, the next name brings a confession that reached into the world of the Beatles. Number 4, John Lennon, the burden he never forgot. John Lennon was born in 1940 in Liverpool and rose to global fame as the creative force behind the Beatles. To the world, he was a symbol of brilliance and cultural change. To James Taylor, he became the center of a quiet regret that followed him for decades. Taylor never framed it as anger or betrayal. He called it a mistake he wished he could undo. In 1968, Taylor became the first American artist signed to Apple Records. He was a young musician recording his debut album while the Beatles worked on the White Album in the same building. To fans, this looked like a golden moment of collaboration. Behind the scenes, Taylor was struggling with heroin dependence and mental health issues, and London's music circles gave him easy access to drugs. He later said he used chlorodyne, a tincture of opium, to steady himself. The key moment came in the studio corridors. Taylor recalled giving Lennon opiates during that period. His later admission was simple. I gave John opiates. He offered no excuses and described himself as a bad influence to be around the band. There was no dispute or falling out, only a truth he carried with discomfort. Taylor never claimed to know how much Lennon used or whether he was the first to offer anything. What mattered was the weight that followed him. The Beatles were in their creative prime, but tensions and pressures were rising. Taylor's role, however small within the larger storm, became part of a memory he could not erase. After the Apple years, Taylor returned to the United States, entered rehab, and began rebuilding his career. Looking back, he spoke of that time without nostalgia. His words stripped away the myth of carefree London sessions and showed how easily artistry and dependency blended inside those rooms. If that story felt heavy, the next name brings a different kind of wound, shaped by love, distance, and the music they made together. Number 3, Joni Mitchell, the muse he could not hold. Joni Mitchell was born in 1943 in Alberta and rose through the late 60s as one of the most influential songwriters of her generation. She and James Taylor met as young artists who admired each other's work. In 1970, they began a brief romantic relationship. To the public, they looked like the golden pair of the Laurel Canyon scene, 2 musicians whose talent and sensitivity seemed perfectly matched. Their collaboration on her 1971 album Blue strengthened that image. Taylor played guitar on several tracks, and their closeness shaped the sound of one of the most important albums of the era. The Private Truth was more fragile. Mitchell. As Taylor's fame accelerated, his heroin addiction deepened. He later acknowledged that his drug use damaged important parts of his life, and Mitchell felt the growing distance. What appeared to be harmony from the outside was, in her world, a relationship under strain. By the end, the gap between them had become too wide. The emotional turning point arrived not through a confrontation, but through the music that followed. Mitchell gave her side a voice on For the Roses in 1972. Songs like See You Sometime and Cold Blue Steel and Sweet Fire suggested regret, disappointment, and the sense of being left behind. The references were not explicit, but listeners familiar with their history recognized the tone. Taylor carried his own reflection into You Can Close Your Eyes, a quiet farewell that many believe he wrote during the final days of their relationship. Their breakup was not loud, but it left a mark. Taylor later said in a 2020 interview that the romance was brief and that their friendship has lasted many decades. His reserved tone suggested respect and restraint, but also an unwillingness to revisit the deeper wound. Silence became a shield, allowing both to move forward without reopening old feelings. In recent years, Taylor has said that Mitchell attended one of his concerts, a small gesture of renewed contact after a long period apart. Their art remains connected, but their personal paths diverged long ago. What once looked like a defining love became a quiet chapter that shaped both of them in different ways. Love and loss influenced his writing, but not everyone admired the result. Up next is the critic who attacked Taylor's music in print and changed the way some listeners saw him. Number 2, Lester Bangs, the critic who tried to bury him. Lester Bangs was born in 1948 in California and became one of the most combative music critics of the early 70s. He built his reputation on blunt judgments and a belief that rock should be loud, aggressive, and disruptive. To the public, he was a fearless voice. To James Taylor, he became a reminder of how harshly some corners of the industry judge sincerity. Their conflict unfolded through print, not confrontation. In 1971, Bangs published his now infamous essay, James Taylor Marked for Death. In it, he dismissed Taylor's songwriting as bardic auteur crap, a phrase meant to belittle the quiet, personal style that had made Taylor a rising star. Bangs pushed further, arguing that Taylor represented what he called I rock, a soft and reflective approach he believed threatened rock's edge. His most troubling line imagined doing someone in with a beer bottle as a fitting metaphor for punishing that trend. It was not a review, it was an attack. To most listeners, Taylor's music offered comfort, soft guitar, clear storytelling, and a voice that carried honesty instead of swagger. To Bangs, that calm presence marked a retreat, a direction he saw as damaging to the culture of rock. The contrast revealed a divide in the era. One side valued rebellion, the other valued reflection. Taylor's work landed firmly in the second camp. Taylor entered the spotlight in the late 60s after growing up in Boston and moving through a period of personal struggle. He emerged in 1968 with a sound that favored intimacy over spectacle. Songs like Fire and Rain and Sweet Baby James were the opposite of what critics like Bangs championed. When Bangs published his essay, the force of his language surprised both industry insiders and fans. Critics often use sharp wit, but Bangs used open hostility. Taylor did not engage. He stayed quiet and continued touring, recording, and working. Years later, in a 2015 interview, he reflected on his nature rather than the criticism. I am an opiate addict. Mellow and smooth is fine for me. It was a simple acknowledgement that he had no interest in meeting Bangs on his terms. The essay stayed with him for a time. Some listeners echoed Bangs' view, calling Taylor's music soft or domesticated, but his audience kept growing. Albums continued to chart, songs endured, the backlash faded. Bangs died in 1982, and the era of combative rock criticism gradually shifted. Words can cut, but money carries its own weight. Up next is the record label Taylor confronted over missing royalties worth millions. Number 1, Warner Brothers Records, the empire that tested his patience. Warner Brothers Records was founded in 1958 and grew into one of the most powerful labels in American music. To the outside world, it looked like a stable partner for artists. For James Taylor, it became the source of a dispute that forced him to examine decades of accounting and the value of his own work. He trusted the label through his rise in the 70s, believing that the numbers behind his most successful albums were accurate. In time, that trust began to crack. The conflict surfaced in 2012 when Taylor filed a lawsuit lawsuit seeking roughly $2 million in unpaid royalties. The issue centered on the shift from physical records to digital sales. His 1979 contract gave him 50% of net receipts from licensing deals tied to his master recordings. According to the lawsuit, Warner treated digital downloads as standard record sales rather than licensed products, which resulted in a much lower royalty rate. The key moment came during the audits that preceded the suit. Taylor's accountants examined the period from 2004 to 2007, and later from 2007 to 2010. They reported a pattern that included underreported sales, misallocated returns, songs placed on compilations without correct credit, foreign sales calculated incorrectly, and budget-priced releases issued without proper authorization. Digital downloads were assigned wholesale pricing instead of retail pricing, which further reduced his earnings. Taken together, the findings suggested underpayments that reached well over $1 million, with a disputed balance of more than $500,000 after adjustments. Warner Brothers paid only a portion of what was identified. The rest, according to the audit, remained unresolved. For Taylor, this was not an emotional battle. It was a matter of contract and clarity. He chose to file suit not for spectacle, but for accuracy, insisting that agreements made decades earlier should still be honored in a new technological landscape. One scene defined the shift. When his team compared the contract language from 1979 with the way digital transactions were handled, the gap became unavoidable. The numbers did not match the terms. That moment turned a long-standing relationship into a legal question. Warner Brothers had once seemed like a steady home for his music. As the industry changed, the partnership became strained by differing interpretations of the same document. The money in question represented songs that had shaped generations, and Taylor felt an obligation to defend their value. The case stood as a reminder that the business behind a gentle voice can be anything but gentle, and in choosing to stand firm, Taylor showed that principle, not anger, guided his final reckoning.